If one day, the people you care about the most, the ones you've spent years loving, worrying about, thinking about, slowly become the ones you have to loosen your grip on. Not completely, not dramatically, just little by little. Would you even know how to do that? I'm not talking about anger, not about cutting ties because something terrible happened. Nothing like that. I mean something quieter, staying connected the way you always have, but somehow, it starts to wear you down. Not all at once, just a little here, a little there, until one day you realize you're tired in a way you can't really explain. It sounds harsh when you say it out loud, almost wrong, because we've all been told the same thing growing up, haven't we? Family is forever. You stay, you forgive, you don't walk away, no matter what. You just stay. But what if that belief, the one you trusted without questioning for decades, what if that's also the thing that's quietly making your later years heavier than they need to be? Lonelier in a way you didn't expect. Not dramatically lonely, just a kind of quiet emptiness that shows up at odd times. Let me tell you about someone. Her name is Margaret. She's 67. If you looked at her life from the outside, you'd probably say she did everything right. Raised her kids carefully, worked when she needed to, cut back on things she wanted so her children could have more. She didn't travel much. Didn't really have hobbies that lasted. Let a lot of friendships fade because there was always something more important at home. And she never made a big deal about it. Never said, "Look what I've done for you." Not even once. Even on days she was exhausted. Even when she felt like no one really noticed her anymore. Even when all she needed was someone to ask, just once, "Hey, are you okay?" Now her kids are grown. They have their own lives now. Jobs, families, responsibilities that don't include her the way they used to. And Margaret, she's still there. In the same house. The phone rings sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Birthdays are remembered, most of the time. Visits happen here and there. Nothing is completely gone, but nothing feels the same either. And that's the strange part. It didn't change overnight. No big moment, no argument, no clear turning point. Just a slow shift. Like a door that isn't shut, but never really open either. Margaret tells herself it's normal. She really believes that. "They're busy," she says. "This is just how it goes. Everyone goes through this." And yes, she's not wrong. But there's another layer she doesn't say out loud. You know that feeling when you check your phone and there's nothing? Or when you think someone might call, but they don't? Or when you realize you're the one reaching out more often than the other side? It's not anger. It's not even disappointment in a loud way. It's quieter than that. Just a tight feeling in your chest. A small heaviness that doesn't go away quickly. And still, she holds on. To the way things used to be. To the idea that maybe it'll come back. To the hope that if she just gives a little more, waits a little longer, stays a little more patient, something will shift back into place. But it doesn't. And this is the part people don't really talk about. The kind of pain that doesn't come from losing someone, but from holding on to them when the connection isn't what it used to be. That kind of pain is strange. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just stays there. Quiet. Day after day. In small moments. Until one day, you notice something feels heavy, but you can't quite name it. Is it loneliness? Maybe. Is it disappointment? A little. Or maybe it's something closer to grief. Not because someone is gone, but because something between you has changed and isn't coming back the same way. And then, there's that question. The one most people don't like to ask. If holding on doesn't feel peaceful anymore, if it starts affecting your sleep, your health, your mood, at what point do you stop calling it love and start seeing it for what it might also be: attachment. That's where people hesitate. Because letting go, especially with family, it feels wrong. Like you're giving up, like you're abandoning your place, like you're doing something you were never supposed to do. So you stay. You stay in conversations that feel a bit empty. You stay in patterns that don't really fulfill you anymore. You stay because that's what you've always done. And you tell yourself, this is just how life is now. But somewhere underneath that, there's a quiet question that doesn't leave. Not loud, not dramatic, just always there. Is this really how I want to spend the rest of my time? Not angrily, not like you want to run away, just honestly. Because something changes when you get older. Time feels different. Energy, too. You don't have the same patience for things that drain you. Peace starts to matter more than being right, more than being needed, more than proving anything to anyone. And still, the habit of staying, of enduring, of putting yourself last, it's hard to break. Really hard. So you tolerate things. You adjust. You ignore that quiet distance. Because the alternative feels unfamiliar. And let's be honest, a little scary. But what if, just for a moment, you looked at it differently? What if letting go didn't mean losing your family? What if it meant letting go of the version of the relationship that no longer exists? What if it meant choosing peace without cutting love? Because this isn't about walking away. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's something much quieter than that, almost invisible from the outside. It's about how you hold on. That's it. Because there's a difference, a real difference, between holding someone with love and holding them with expectation. And most of us never learned that difference. So we hold the only way we know how, tightly, carefully, with hope and a bit of fear mixed in. And over time, that kind of holding starts to hurt. Not all at once, just slowly. Until one day, you realize something you didn't expect. What you thought was keeping you connected might actually be what's keeping you stuck. So let me ask you again. If you start to see that not everything is meant to stay the same forever, would you be able, not to walk away, but just loosen your grip a little, enough to breathe again? Because here's the truth, whether we like it or not, family matters, love matters, connection matters. Of course they do. But not every connection is meant to be carried the same way for your entire life. And maybe, just maybe, real wisdom later in life isn't about holding on tighter. It's about learning how to hold on without hurting yourself in the process. Let's slow down a bit, not because there's something complicated coming next, but because what we're talking about, it touches something very quiet inside people. And quiet things usually need a little space. You might not even notice it right away. But if you're honest, something in what we just talked about probably felt familiar. Not exactly the same story, not the same house, not the same people, not the same details, but the feeling, that small shift, that sense that something is slightly off, even though everything still looks okay on the outside. And that's the strange part, because this isn't one kind of story. It shows up in different ways, different homes, different families, different personalities, but somehow, the feeling underneath, it's almost the same. Let me show you what I mean. There's a man, let's call him Robert. He's 72. His whole life, things were simple in his mind. You work, you provide, you take care of your family. That's what a man does. So he worked long hours, missed some dinners, missed a few birthdays. Not because he didn't care. Actually, it was the opposite. He thought that's what caring looked like. Doing what needed to be done. No complaints, no questions, just keep going. And now, he's retired. The house is quiet. Not empty exactly, just quieter than he expected. For the first time in a long time, he has time. Real time. Time to sit, time to think. Time to wait a little. And maybe, without saying it out loud, he thought that now it would come back. The attention, the closeness, the feeling of being needed. But what he didn't expect was how much everyone else had moved on. His son, busy, always busy. Work, kids, bills, life. His daughter calls, but mostly when something comes up. Advice, help, quick check-ins. They love him. That part is true. But the way they show it now, it doesn't match what he feels. So he waits. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. He waits for longer conversations, for someone to sit with him without checking the time, for something that feels like it used to. And slowly, something settles in. Not anger. He's not angry. Just a kind of distance. Like standing a few steps away from something you used to be right in the middle of. And the hardest part? He doesn't talk about it. Because in his mind, he's still the father, still the strong one, still the one who gives, not the one who needs. So instead, he adjusts. Just a little at first. He lowers expectations. Tells himself, it's fine. It's normal. This is just how it goes. But underneath all that, there's a question that doesn't really leave. Was this how it was supposed to feel? Now let me tell you about someone else. A woman named Linda. She's 64. She's the one who keeps things smooth. You probably know someone like her. Or maybe it's you. She avoids conflict. Always. If there's tension, she softens it. If people argue, she steps in. If someone feels hurt, she becomes the bridge. And for years, it worked. People relied on her, appreciated her, in their own way. But over time, something changed. Not suddenly, just gradually. People stopped noticing. Not because they didn't care, but because it became normal, expected. Her effort became invisible. Her presence just assumed. Like the lights in a room, you don't think about them until they're gone. And one day, she had a thought. A small one, but it stayed. If I stopped doing all of this, would anyone even notice? She didn't say it out loud, but it stayed with her, because she wasn't sure what the answer was. And that's a strange feeling, to spend years holding things together and then wonder if it even matters anymore. Now here's something people don't always admit. You can be surrounded by family and still feel alone. Not physically alone, not sitting in an empty room, but something else. You're there, they're there, same table, same conversations, but somehow you're not really part of it the same way. Conversations stay on the surface. No one really asks how you're doing, beyond the usual, you good? Your stories feel less important, less needed, and you start to notice it in small ways. You speak, and people move on quickly. You listen, more than you talk. You're present, but not really included. And then, a thought appears, quietly. When did this change? When did I become less central? And the truth is, there's no clear answer. No single moment, no big event. Just time. Life shifting, priorities changing. And that's what makes it hard, because you can't point to anything. You can't say, this is when it happened. You just feel it. And here's the complicated part. You understand it. You know they're busy. You know they have responsibilities. You know they're not trying to hurt you. And at the same time, you still feel something. That mix. Gratitude and sadness. Love and distance. Understanding and something that feels a bit like loss. And most people don't talk about it because it feels uncomfortable. Like you're questioning something you're not supposed to question. Family, belonging, connection, things that are supposed to feel stable. But what happens when they don't feel as stable as before? What happens when love is still there, but it feels different? That's where people get stuck because they don't know what to do with that feeling. So they ignore it, or explain it away, or just carry it quietly. But carrying it doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it softer on the outside, heavier on the inside. So if you've ever felt this, even just a little, sitting with people you care about, but feeling slightly disconnected, waiting for something you can't quite describe, wondering if things are changing, but not knowing what to do about it, then you're not imagining it, and you're definitely not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. This isn't weakness, it's awareness. It's that moment where you start seeing things as they are now, not as they used to be, not as you hoped they would stay, but as they actually are. And that moment? It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also important because it's the beginning of something. Not loss, not distance, but clarity. And from that clarity, something else can begin. Something quieter, something more honest, something that, eventually, feels like peace. Let's not rush this part, because this is where things start to get a little uncomfortable. Not in a dramatic way, not like something shocking, but in that quiet way, where you hear something and you think, yeah, I felt that before. Even if you've never said it out loud. Here's the truth. People change. You already know that. Of course you do. You've seen it your whole life. Friends change, neighbors change, even you. You're not the same person you were 20, 30 years ago. But somehow, when it comes to family, we expect something different. We expect it to stay. Not exactly frozen, but close. We expect the feeling to stay the same. The closeness, the rhythm, the way people show up for each other. And when that shifts, it doesn't feel like change. It feels like something is missing, like something slipped through your fingers, without warning. Let's go back for a second. Think about when your kids were younger. You remember that, right? The noise, the constant movement, the feeling that everything somehow depended on you. You weren't just part of their life. You were the center of it. They needed you. Not occasionally, all the time. For everything. Advice, comfort, structure, even small things, like where something was in the house. Your presence mattered. In a very clear, very obvious way. And that does something to a person. It builds a sense of purpose. You don't even question it. You just wake up, and you know what your role is. But then, slowly, things change. Not in one big moment, not overnight, just little by little. They grow up. They start making their own decisions. They stop asking for permission and start informing you instead. Then eventually, they stop informing you too. Not because they're trying to push you away, just because their life is expanding. And without realizing it, your role starts to shift. You're still important, but not in the same way. And that's the part people struggle with. Because emotionally, you're still connected to how things used to feel. You still expect that same closeness, that same level of being needed. But reality has moved forward. And those two things, they don't always match anymore. So what do most people do? They hold on, tighter. Not aggressively, not in a controlling way, just a little more effort. A few more calls, a few more messages, a little more giving. Because somewhere inside, there's this belief that if you stay present enough, things will feel like they used to. But here's where it starts to hurt. The more you try to hold on to something that has already changed, the more you feel the distance. And that feeling, it's hard to describe. Because nothing is wrong. No one has done anything terrible. There's no clear conflict. But something feels off, and you can't quite fix it. Because what you're trying to hold on to doesn't exist in the same way anymore. And that's not failure. It's not betrayal. It's just life moving forward. But when it's your family, it doesn't feel that simple. Because family isn't just people. It's identity. It's history. It's everything you've built your life around. So when it shifts, it feels personal. You start asking questions, not out loud, just in your head. Did I misunderstand what we had? Did I expect too much? Did I give too much without thinking about what would come back? And the hard part? There's no clean answer. Because relationships, especially family, they're not fair in a neat, balanced way. They're messy. They evolve, sometimes unevenly. Now let's talk about something even quieter. Expectations. The kind you don't even realize you have. You don't sit there and say, "My children must call me every Sunday." But you feel it. You expect to be remembered, included, considered. Not out of entitlement, just because it feels natural. That's what family does, right? But here's the thing. Your idea of normal connection was shaped by your life. Their idea was shaped by theirs. Different time, different pace, different pressures. For you, connection might mean time, real time, sitting together, talking without rushing. For them, it might mean something else. A quick call, a text, a short visit squeezed into a busy week. And here's where it gets tricky. They might feel like they're doing enough, while you feel like something is missing. And neither of you is completely wrong. But that gap, that difference in expectation, it creates tension. Not loud tension, not arguments, just a quiet misunderstanding. And when that misunderstanding sits there long enough, it turns into something heavier. Disappointment. Not because they don't love you, but because the way they show it doesn't meet what you need anymore. And then something else starts to happen. Something most people don't talk about. Your emotional state starts depending on them, on how often they call, how they respond, how much they include you. And that's where things become fragile. Because now, your sense of peace is tied to something you can't control. Their time, their attention, their choices. And that's a hard place to be, especially now. At this stage of life, where what you really need is stability, calm, a sense that you're okay, regardless of what's happening around you. But instead, you find yourself waiting for connection, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for something that used to come naturally. And when it doesn't, you feel it. Quietly. You don't always say anything, because saying something feels uncomfortable, like you're asking for too much, like you're being difficult. So you stay quiet, and that silence, it builds. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. Holding on to every relationship the same way you always have can slowly cost you something. Not all at once, not dramatically, but over time. You start adjusting yourself, lowering expectations, ignoring what you feel, accepting things that don't really sit right just to keep the connection. And little by little, you lose clarity. Not your love, not your care, but your sense of what actually feels right for you. And that's where things start to shift. Because eventually, a thought appears. Quiet, almost hesitant. Maybe this isn't the only way. Maybe holding on like this isn't what brings peace anymore. That's the turning point. Not a big decision, just a small awareness. That maybe you don't need to lose people, but you do need to change how you relate to them. Less expectation, more awareness, less holding tightly, more seeing things as they are. And that shift, it's small. You might not even notice it at first, but it changes everything. Because for the first time, you step back just enough to see clearly. Not through memory, not through what you wish things were, but through what's actually happening. In reality, it's not always comfortable, but it's honest. And honesty is where peace starts. Let's slow down again, just a little. Because up to this point, you might be thinking, Okay, I understand it. You see the pattern, you recognize the feeling, maybe you even see yourself in it. But understanding something doesn't really change anything right away, does it? You can understand it perfectly and still feel the same way tomorrow morning. Still check your phone. Still wait for that call. Still feel that small drop in your chest when nothing shows up. So this part matters. Not because it's going to fix everything, it won't, but because this is where things actually begin to shift. In real life. Not big changes, not dramatic decisions. Just small things. Quiet adjustments that nobody else even notices. But you feel them. And over time, they change how everything feels. So let's talk about that. Not like a list, not like advice, just real life. The first shift is simple, but not easy. It's this idea of expecting less without loving less. And yeah, I know how that sounds. At first, it almost feels wrong, like you're lowering your standards, like you're accepting less than you should. But that's not what it is. It's not about settling. It's about not tying your peace to something you can't control. Let me put it this way. Say you're used to your son calling you every Sunday. For years, it just happened. Naturally. No thinking about it. Then slowly, things change. He gets busier. The calls get shorter. Then sometimes, they don't happen at all. And you notice. Of course you notice. So what do? You wait. You tell yourself, he'll call. And when he doesn't, you feel it. Not in a big way, just that small disappointment. That quiet, oh, okay. And it adds up, week after week. Now here's the shift. Instead of waiting for it to go back to how it was, you accept what it is now. Not with frustration, not with bitterness, just honestly. You say to yourself, his life is different now. The way he connects is different. And then you adjust. Not to zero, you're not shutting down, but you're no longer expecting it to happen exactly the way it used to. So when he calls, you enjoy it. Fully. Without comparing it to the past. Without thinking, it used to be longer. And when he doesn't, you don't take it as rejection. You don't let it define how your whole day feels. That's the difference. You still care, you just don't depend on it the same way. Now there's another shift. This one is even quieter. Creating space without actually going anywhere. You're still there, still seeing your family, still talking, still showing up. Nothing changes on the outside, but inside, you stop taking everything personally. And that sounds simple, but it's not, because we're used to interpreting things. Someone is quiet, we think, did I do something? Someone forgets something, we think, I'm not important. Someone seems distracted, we feel it. But what if it's not about you? What if it's just their life, their stress, their schedule, their head being somewhere else? And instead of pulling everything back to yourself, you give it space. You let it be what it is. And that space, it does something. It takes pressure off you. You stop analyzing every little thing. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop trying to figure it out. And honestly, that alone is a kind of relief. Now here's the part most people resist. Turning your life back toward yourself. Not away from your family, just back toward you. And I know that can feel strange, even uncomfortable, because for years, your focus was outward. Your kids, your family, what they needed, what they were doing. And now, suddenly, you're supposed to think about yourself? It feels unfamiliar, almost selfish. But think about it for a second. If not now, when? You've already spent years giving, years showing up, years making sure everyone else was okay. So now, what would it look like to also make sure you're okay? Not in a big dramatic way, just small things. A walk in the morning without rushing. Sitting down with a book again, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Talking to someone, not because you have to, but because you want to. Even just sitting quietly, without feeling like something is missing. These things seem small, but they're not. They rebuild something inside you. Because when your life starts to feel full on its own, your relationships stop carrying all the weight. They become lighter, less pressure, less expectation, more natural. And here's something important. Letting go doesn't mean cutting people off. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They think, if this hurts, I need distance. But most of the time, it's not distance you need. It's detachment. And those are not the same thing. Distance is physical. Detachment is emotional. You can still be close to someone without being emotionally tied to every little thing they do. You can still love them without needing them to act a certain way. You can still be there without losing yourself in the process. And when you start doing that, something shifts. Not in them, in you. You feel calmer, less reactive, less pulled in different directions. And sometimes, something unexpected happens. When you stop holding so tightly, people come closer. Not because you asked, not because you pushed, but because the pressure is gone. The relationship feels easier, for both of you. But even if that doesn't happen, even if they stay exactly the same, you're different. And that's what matters. Because now, your peace isn't tied to what they do. It's yours. Imagine this for a second. You wake up, and you're not immediately thinking about who hasn't called. You go through your day without checking for signs of attention. You sit with your family, and you're just there. Not measuring, not comparing, not keeping track of who gives more, who gives less. Just present and steady. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're not holding everything so tightly anymore. That kind of peace, it doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from these small shifts, these quiet decisions, these moments where you choose to respond differently. And no, it won't be perfect. Old habits will come back. Old expectations will show up. You'll feel it again sometimes, that pull, that disappointment, that quiet tension. But now, you have a choice. You can go back to holding tightly, or you can ease your grip just a little. Just enough to breathe. And if you keep doing that, day by day, something changes. Not fast, but steadily. And that steady change, it leads somewhere deeper. Because next, we're going to look at a real story, not theory, not ideas, a real life that went through this, messy, imperfect, but honest. And in that story, you might recognize something even more clearly. Not just what letting go looks like, but what it actually feels like on the other side. Let me tell you a story. Not one of those dramatic stories where everything changes overnight. No big turning point. No moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Just a real one. The kind that happens slowly, almost quietly, the way most things in life actually do. Her name is Eleanor. She's 69. If you met her, you'd probably think she's the kind of person who has everything under control. Calm, kind, always paying attention to the little things. The type of person who remembers what you like to eat, or asks about something you mentioned weeks ago. For most of her life, she knew exactly who she was. She was a mother. That was the center of everything. Not just part of her life, it was her life. Her days revolved around her kids. When they were small, the house was full. Not just noise, but purpose. You wake up, and there's something to do. Lunches to prepare, clothes to wash, problems to solve. Even the stress felt meaningful, because it meant you were needed. And being needed, that matters more than people realize. It gives structure to your day. It gives weight to your time. It tells you belong somewhere. And Eleanor held on to that role completely. Not halfway, not occasionally, completely. She showed up for everything. School events, late-night worries, small problems that felt big at the time. And even when she was tired, she didn't question it. Because to her, that was love. You give, you stay. You don't pull back. That's just what you do. And she did. For years. A long time. Until, without any clear moment, that part of her life ended. Her children grew up, moved out, started their own lives. At first, she felt proud. Of course she did. That's what you're supposed to feel, right? You raised them well. They're independent. They don't need you the same way anymore. That's the goal. That's success. But here's the part no one really prepares you for. What comes after that? The quiet. Not empty, exactly. Just different. The house feels bigger. Time stretches in a way it never used to. There's no one asking where things are. No one needing help with small problems. No one coming in the door in the afternoon. And for the first time in years, there's space. Too much space sometimes. So Eleanor did what a lot of people do. She stayed busy, cleaning more than necessary, organizing things that were already fine, cooking meals, even when no one else was there to eat them. Anything to avoid sitting still for too long. Because when things get quiet, thoughts show up. And some of those thoughts are not easy to sit with. Like the question she didn't want to ask. Who am I now? Not out loud. Never out loud. Just somewhere in the background. So instead of sitting with that question, she turned outward. She called her kids more often, checked in, asked if they needed anything, offered help, even when it wasn't really needed. At first, it felt natural, normal. That's what she had always done. But slowly, something changed. Calls became shorter, sometimes rushed, sometimes missed. Messages got answered later, or not at all. Not in a harsh way. Not in a way you could point to and say, that's wrong. Just life happening on their side. But for Eleanor, it didn't feel like life happening. It felt like distance. And distance feels a lot like loss when you're not expecting it. So she tried a little harder. Not aggressively, just a little more effort. More calls, more checking in, more showing up. Because somewhere inside, there was this hope that if she stayed close enough, it would feel like it used to. But it didn't. And this is where the quiet pain started. Not something you can explain easily. Just a feeling that something wasn't sitting right anymore. Then one day, something small happened. Nothing dramatic. But it stayed with her. She planned a visit to her daughter's house. Nothing big, just bringing some food. Something she knew her grandkids liked. She took her time preparing, packed everything carefully, even picked up a small gift. Because that's who she was. That's what she did. When she arrived, everything was fine. Not bad, not uncomfortable, just not what she expected. Her daughter was busy, really busy. Phone calls, things to do, plans already in motion. The visit felt rushed, like it had to fit into the day instead of being part of it. And at one point, her daughter said something. Simple. You don't have to come all the time, Mom. You should rest more. It wasn't meant to hurt. It really wasn't. But it did. Because what Eleanor heard was something else. She heard, you don't need to be here the same way anymore. And that stayed with her. That evening, back at home, she didn't cry, didn't call anyone, didn't complain. She just sat, quietly, in a house that suddenly felt different. And for the first time, she didn't push the feeling away. She let it sit there. And what came up was something she hadn't fully faced before. Grief. Not for a person, but for a version of life that was gone. A version where she was needed all the time, where her role was clear, where her place was obvious. And as she sat there, something shifted, slowly, not all at once. She realized she wasn't just holding on to her children. She was holding on to who she used to be, the one who was needed. And that was the hard part. Because if that role was changing, then something inside her had to change too. And for the first time, she saw it clearly. The problem wasn't that her children didn't love her. They did, in their own way. The problem was, she was still expecting the same kind of relationship in a completely different stage of life. And that expectation was what was hurting her. So she made a small change. Not big, not dramatic, just small. She stopped calling every day. Not to punish anyone, not to pull away, just to create space. She stopped offering help before it was needed, and instead, she asked herself a question, a simple one. What do I need today? At first, she didn't know. That question felt strange, because for years, she had answered it for everyone else. But slowly, things came back. Simple things. Walking outside, sitting with a book, talking to a neighbor she hadn't really had time for before. Moments that used to feel empty started to feel peaceful. And something unexpected happened. Her relationship with her children changed. Not because they suddenly became different, but because she did. She stopped measuring their love by how often they showed it. When they called, she was present, fully. When they didn't, she was still okay. And over time, that quiet tension, the one she couldn't explain before, it softened. Not completely gone, but lighter, easier. And in its place, something else appeared. Acceptance. Not giving up, not disconnecting, just understanding that things had changed, and that was okay. One day, her daughter said something. "You seem different, Mom, more relaxed." Eleanor smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't holding everything so tightly. Later, she said something that stayed with me, something simple. I didn't lose my children. I just had to let go of the version of them I was holding on to. And that's it. That's the story. No big lesson, no dramatic ending, just real. Because what she went through, a lot of people go through it. Quietly, without talking about it. And if you saw yourself anywhere in that, even just a little, then maybe you're already closer than you think to finding your own version of peace. So after a story like that, most people feel two things at the same time. A bit of relief and a bit of confusion. Relief because something finally makes sense. But confusion because, okay, now what? Because here's the thing nobody tells you clearly. Understanding letting go and actually doing it are not the same. Not even close. And this is where people get it wrong. Not because they're careless, just because it's easy to misunderstand something this subtle. So let's talk about a couple of those misunderstandings. Not in a formal way, just honestly. The first one happens a lot. People hear let go, and they think it means distance, pulling away, stopping contact, becoming cold. Like the only way to protect yourself is to shut the door. And to be fair, sometimes people do that. They stop calling, stop visiting, stop showing up. And for a moment, it feels better. Of course it does, because the thing that was causing discomfort is no longer right in front of you. But then something else shows up. Silence. And silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes it's just empty. Because here's the problem. If the feeling is still there, cutting off the interaction doesn't remove it. It just leaves you alone with it. You start thinking more, replaying things, wondering if you overreacted, or if you should have handled it differently. And slowly, what felt like freedom at first starts to feel more like isolation. Not because you wanted to be alone, but because you didn't quite understand what you actually needed. You didn't need distance, you needed relief from the pressure. That's different. You can still talk to someone without carrying the same emotional weight. You can still be in someone's life without depending on how they act to feel okay. That's what real letting go looks like. Not cutting people out, just holding the connection differently. Now, the second misunderstanding, this one's harder to notice because it hides really well. It looks like love, feels like love, sounds like love, But underneath, there's something else mixed in: control. Not in an obvious way, not like telling people what to do, more like expecting things to happen a certain way. You want them to call, not just sometimes, but in a way that feels right to you. You want them to check in, to show care, to respond in a way that makes you feel seen. And when they don't, something shifts inside. You feel it. A little disappointment, a little frustration, maybe even a thought like, why is it so hard for them to do something so simple? And without realizing it, you start trying to adjust things, remind them, nudge them, shape the interaction, just a little. Not because you want control, but because you want connection. That's the part people miss. It's not about power. It's about wanting to feel close again. But here's the quiet truth. When love depends on how someone else behaves, it becomes fragile. Because now, your experience of that love is no longer yours. It's tied to their actions, and their actions are not something you control. Think about this for a second. Have you ever done something kind and felt a little hurt when no one noticed? Or given your time and felt something drop inside when it wasn't returned? Or reached out and felt that small shift when the response wasn't what you hoped for? That moment right there, that's where love quietly turns into expectation. And expectation, when it's not met, turns into something heavier, something that stays. And this doesn't mean your love is wrong, not at all. It just means the way it's tied to an outcome is what's causing the strain. So what does letting go mean here? It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop needing love to look a certain way. You can still care, still show up, still be present, but you're no longer measuring it, no longer waiting for it to come back in a specific form. And when you do that, something changes. You feel lighter, not because anything outside has changed, but because inside, there's less tension. There's one more layer here, a deeper one. Most people don't say it out loud, but they feel it. The fear of becoming less important, not completely forgotten, just less central. You notice it in small moments, conversations moving on without you, decisions happening without asking your opinion, your role shifting from leading to supporting to sometimes just observing. And that brings up a question, a quiet one. Do I still matter the same way? That question, it's not about ego, it's about identity. Because for a long time, your place in your family defined you. Parent, provider, the one who holds things together. And now, those roles are changing. Not gone, just different. And that creates space, a kind of space that feels unfamiliar. And honestly, a little uncomfortable. Because instead of stepping into that space, most people try to fill it the old way. Stay involved the same way, hold on the same way, show up the same way, even when it doesn't quite fit anymore. And that effort, it becomes exhausting because it's not aligned with reality. So here's the real question. What happens when you stop trying to hold your place, the old way? What happens when you allow your role to change? Not resist it, not fight it, just allow it. At first, it feels strange. Of course it does, because you're used to being needed in a certain way. But over time, something shifts. You stop measuring your value by how needed you are. You start feeling it in a different way, in how calm you feel, in how steady your day is, in how little you're pulled around by things you can't control. And slowly, that fear of becoming less important starts to fade. Not completely, but enough that you can breathe a little easier. Because you realize something, you're not losing your place, you're just finding a new one. And that new place, it's quieter, but also steadier, less dependent, more grounded. And from there, everything starts to look a little different. Not perfect, but clearer. And that clarity, it leads somewhere deeper. Not more effort, not more thinking. Something else. A different way of seeing things altogether. And that's where we're going next. Let's slow this down. Not because we have to, just because this part doesn't work if you rush it. You can't force this kind of understanding. It's more like something you sit with, something that lands when it's ready. Up to now, we've been talking about people, relationships, expectations, that quiet tension that builds over time. But this part isn't really about them anymore. It's about you. Not in a big, dramatic, change your life kind of way, just how you sit with things, how you experience your own life when nothing outside changes. Because here's something that starts to become clear, especially later in life. You don't actually control much. Not really. You can't control how often someone calls. You can't control how they respond. You can't control how their life unfolds or how much space you have in it. And if you spend your energy trying to control those things, you end up tired. Not physically, just emotionally tired. So the question slowly becomes, if I can't control that, what can I do? And the answer is not big. It's not impressive, but it's real. You can notice how you react. That's it. That small space between what happens and how you respond. Most people don't even see that space. Something happens, and they're already inside the feeling, already reacting, already interpreting. But if you slow down just enough, you start to see it. Someone doesn't call. There's a moment, just a moment, before the thought comes in. Why didn't they call? Did I do something? Maybe they don't care. That moment right there, that's where everything changes. Because you don't have to follow the same path every time. You can pause, not force yourself to feel different, just pause. And maybe instead of going straight into that old pattern, you notice something else. They're probably just busy. Or even simpler, I don't actually know why. And that might not seem like much, but it softens things a lot. Because now you're not building a whole story around one moment. You're letting it be just a moment. There's this idea people talk about sometimes. You might have heard it. Let things be. Honestly, it sounds kind of empty when you first hear it. Like, okay, sure, but how? But it's not about doing nothing. It's about not immediately trying to fix everything. Not every feeling needs to be solved. Not every moment needs to be understood. Sometimes, it just needs space. Think about your relationships. Not how they used to be, not how you wish they were, just how they are, right now. If you look at them, without comparing, without measuring, without asking them to match the past, what do you see? Maybe they're quieter. Maybe they're less frequent. Maybe they're different in ways you didn't expect, but they're still there, in their own way. And when you stop asking them to be something else, the tension eases. Not disappears, just eases. Because you're no longer pulling against reality, you're standing with it. There's another shift that happens here. It's subtle. You stop needing things to feel a certain way, to be okay. That's a big one. Because for a long time, feeling okay depended on something. Someone calling, someone showing up, someone remembering. And when that didn't happen, it affected everything. Your mood, your day, sometimes even how you saw yourself. But what if feeling okay didn't depend on that? What if it was steadier than that? Not because everything outside is perfect, but because inside, you're not being pulled in every direction anymore. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It just means you're not attached the same way. And that word, attached, it's not a bad thing. It just becomes heavy when it's too tight. Like holding something too firmly for too long. At some point, your hands start to hurt. And all you really need to do is loosen your grip. Not drop it, just loosen it. There's also something else that starts to change. How you see yourself. For a long time, you probably saw yourself through your role. Parent, caregiver, the one people rely on. And those roles matter. They always will. But they're not the whole picture. And when those roles start to shift, it feels like something is missing. But maybe it's not that something is missing. Maybe there's just Space now. Space you didn't have before. And space can feel uncomfortable at first because you're not used to it. But if you don't rush to fill it, if you just sit with it a little, it becomes something else. It becomes freedom. Freedom to wake up without being pulled in 10 directions. Freedom to choose how you spend your time. Freedom to just be. Not useful, not needed, just present. And that kind of presence, it's different. It's quieter, but it's also enough. You'll still have moments, of course you will. Moments where you miss how things used to be. Moments where something small hits you unexpectedly. A memory, a silence, an empty chair at the table. That doesn't go away, and it's not supposed to. But you don't get lost in it the same way. You feel it. You let it pass. Like a wave. It comes, rises, then fades. And you're still there. Not broken, not overwhelmed, just there. So let me ask you something. Not to answer, just to think about. What would it feel like to let things be just as they are for a while? Not forever, just for a while. No fixing, no adjusting, no trying to bring everything back, just letting it be. It might feel strange, maybe even a little empty, but also maybe a little lighter, a little quieter, a little easier to breathe. And sometimes that's where things begin. Not with change, not with effort, just with noticing. And from that place, something shifts. You stop fighting what is. You stop trying to hold everything in place. You stop carrying things that were never meant to be carried forever. And in that space, something else shows up. Not big, not dramatic, just steady. Peace. Let's come back for a second. Not all the way back to the beginning, just here, where you are now. After everything we've talked about, the stories, the small realizations, those quiet moments where something felt a little too familiar. You don't need to figure everything out right now. You don't need to make a decision. Honestly, most of this isn't about doing anything big. It's just seeing things a little more clearly than before. Because if there's one thing that keeps showing up in all of this, it's this. Not everything is meant to stay the same. Even the things we thought would, especially those things. And that doesn't mean something went wrong. It just means something changed. That's it. Nothing dramatic, nothing to blame, just life moving. If you look back at your own life, really look at it, you'll see it's always been like this. People came close. Some stayed, some drifted, some disappeared completely. At the time, it might have felt confusing or even painful, but somehow you kept going. You adjusted. You found your way into the next stage, even if you didn't realize it at the time. And now, you're here. And this stage feels different. It's not about building anymore. Not in the same way. It's not about proving anything. Not about holding everything together like before. It's quieter than that. More internal. It asks something else from you. Not more effort, just more awareness. More honesty with yourself. About what actually feels okay and what doesn't. About what still fits and what doesn't anymore. And here's where it gets simple. Not easy, but simple. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving anyone. It just means you stop holding that love so tightly that it starts to hurt you. You stop needing it to look a certain way. You stop waiting for it to come back in the exact form it once had. You allow it to be different, lighter, sometimes quieter, sometimes less frequent, but still there in its own way. Because real love, when it's not mixed with pressure, doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't leave you questioning yourself. It doesn't make you feel like you have to earn your place. It just exists, even if it looks different. And maybe that's something we don't hear enough. That love can change shape without disappearing. That connection can become quieter without being lost. That distance doesn't always mean rejection. Sometimes it just means life moved, and people moved with it, including you. There's also something else here, something you might not notice right away. When you stop holding everything so tightly, you get something back. Space. Not empty space, just room to breathe. Room to wake up and not immediately think about who hasn't called. Room to go through your day without that quiet tension in the background. Room to sit with your own life and feel okay in it. And that's not small. That's actually a big shift. Because for a long time, maybe your sense of peace depended on other people, on how they showed up, how often they reached out, how closely things matched what you expected. And now, it doesn't have to be like that. Now, your peace can be yours. Not perfect, not constant, but steadier, less fragile, less dependent on things you can't control. And here's something worth holding on to. You didn't lose your place, even if it feels like it changed. You didn't become less important, even if you're not needed the same way. You just moved into a different part of the story, a quieter one, but not an empty one. And sometimes, that quieter place is actually where things start to feel more real, more honest, more yours. So let me ask you something. Not something you have to answer out loud, just something to notice. Is there someone in your life that you've been holding on to a little too tightly? Not because you don't love them, but because you've been holding on to how things used to be. And maybe, just maybe, it's been tiring. If that's there, even a little, you don't need to change everything. You don't need to step away. You don't need to make it dramatic. Just notice it. And maybe ease your grip a little. Just enough to feel the difference. That's all. And if anything we talked about here felt familiar, if it stayed with you even for a moment, then you're already doing something important. You're paying attention. And that's where everything starts. Not with action, with awareness. Before we end this, I want to leave you with one simple thought. Not a rule, not advice, just something to sit with. Not everyone who becomes distant is gone. Not every change is a loss. And not every time you let go means something is ending. Sometimes, it just means you're finally making room for a version of your life that feels a little more peaceful, a little more honest, a little more like you again. And if you've ever gone through something like this, even in a small way, you can share it. Or just think about it quietly. Either way, it matters. Because more people feel this than you might think. They just don't always say it. Take your time after this. No rush, no pressure, just let it settle. That's enough.